and then move into our program. So today's event is Refocusing EU Tourism Post-Brexit and COVID-19, and it's hosted by the Colorado European Union Center of Excellence at the University of Colorado Boulder. So I'm Felicia Naranjo Martinez. I'm the executive director of this center, also known as CEUCE. We at CEUCE aim to foster links between the United States Mountain West and the European Union by promoting mutual understanding and engagement among students, educators, researchers, policymakers, business and legal practitioners, and the general public. Today, we are so pleased to welcome Robert Evans, former member of the European Parliament. Now, before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. We welcome your questions. Please use the chat functions to submit your questions during and after the presentation. So feel free to write your questions as the talk is going, and then direct them to me, to Felicia Martinez. A recording of today's event will appear on our Colorado European Union Center of Excellence website under the banner of the University of Colorado Boulder. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Robert Evans. He was a London member of the European Parliament from 1994 to 2009. And let me just make sure that he can come up here. There we go. Great. Thanks, Robert. Thanks for showing up on the video. Perfect. So he was a London member of the European Parliament from 1994, to 2009, representing Tony Blair's Labour Party. For his third term in the Brussels and Strasbourg institutions, Robert was a member of the Transport and Tourism Committee, where his proudest achievement was to steer through the Parliament legislation which outlawed all discrimination against disabled passengers when traveling by air in every EU member state. Currently, Robert has become a member of Surrey County Council, a second-tier government in the UK, and part-time lecturer at Royal Holloway College at the University of London. Amongst other commitments, he has spoken about Brexit at the University of Illinois at Urbana in Champaign and Pennsylvania State University. So in his spare time, Robert enjoys travel, of course, when permitted, watching and playing sport, and he's also following a course himself studying the politics of South Asia with a special interest in Bangladesh, including trying to learn the language. Welcome, Robert. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us today. And so with 39 languages spoken in Bangladesh, are you learning Bangala?
Yes, Bengali, yes, yes. The main Bangla, yes.
Bangla, yeah.
Yeah, the main language, yeah. Slowly.
It sounds a bit of a challenge.
But yeah, so it is, yes.
Great. So please begin. We're looking forward to this.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Felicia, for those warm words of welcome. And thank you to you and the university and Shireen Miller, who's done the organising, as I'm sure many other people have been involved. Now, let me see if I can share the screen, which we hope is going to work. It worked before, so you should have a little 3, 2, 1. Can you see this?
Yes, we're good.
We can, right. So
we're on to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, we are. That was just a sort of introduction. So
perfect.
You should be, have you got some lovely letters flowing down here?
Yes, we do.
We do, good. So that is me. And that's where I'm teaching at the moment. And I'll a little bit more about that in a minute. And that is you in Boulder, Colorado, which I have to admit that I've never been to Boulder, but as I was saying to Shireen by email, I have been to Denver, and I went skiing once in Vail, which I think is not very far away, and I've been to Denver one summer because my sister-in-law is in charge of building the new, I think it's rapid transit or light transit system in Denver, the new trains and stations that are going into all around Denver. She lives in Boston and has spent the last few years going backwards and forwards from Boston to Denver once a week. So I have been, so I know a little bit about it, but I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today, but I'm sure you all understand the circumstances whereby about a little bit more, but in a few moments. But I am now just outside London. For those of you who have ever been to London, I'm very, very close to Heathrow Airport, which when I was in the European Parliament, I used to frequent nearly every week. And that, there you can see how I've changed a bit. That's my very last day in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. That's the splendid Strasbourg Parliament building in the background, and the Parliament, European Parliament, meets both in Strasbourg and Brussels. As Felicia said in her introductory remarks, I'm now teaching at Royal Holloway College, and that's the building of Holloway College, which is unique, as I suppose all buildings are unique, but this is a very interesting old building built during the reign of Queen Victoria to look a bit like a French chateau. And it's not actually in London, it's about 25-30 miles outside London, near Windsor, where Her Majesty the Queen lives, and we have about 9,000 or 10,000 students. So it's a small college by comparison, a small college of the University of London, and I'm a part-time teacher there, tutor, lecturer. And I'm also a member of Surrey County Council, which is, Surrey has a population of about 1.2 million, and there's 81 councillors, so it's bigger than probably, I don't know, it's not as big as the states, obviously, from the State House of Representatives, but it's bigger than town councils, and it is, as we call it, a second tier or authority. So this is what we are going to be looking at today. And in case you think I can't spell refocusing, I checked it, and there's a difference in spelling in American spelling and English spelling. So I thought, just to be a little bit, I'd use the English spelling. So you'll forgive me if that looks as though I can't spell refocusing. And I chose this slide for a variety of reasons, because it's got a lot of interesting places. And if we had a lot of time, we could see if we could identify all those different buildings from around Europe and the world. Most of them are in Europe, and not all of them. And if you wanted a little question for later on, I know you're not able to answer questions or put your hands up in the normal way. Questions here, sort of anybody can say, which of those two buildings were built or designed by the same person? If you can look at that, you may know it. If you don't, well, we'll come back to that a bit later on. Okay, so post-Brexit and post-COVID-19. Well, we're not post-COVID-19 here. We still are very much, as I think you are, very much in the depths of the virus at the moment. And I think, but I'm not sure, our regulations and rules in this country are much more severe than in the United States. This is the government, Her Majesty's government, British government's website at the moment, which is laying down the rules. At the moment in this country, you must stay at home. You cannot travel, you can't go abroad unless you've got a permitted reason to do so. So I could not come to Colorado. That would not be a legal reason. Very few people get permits to go to other countries. I think Americans can still come to this country, about more later on, but we must stay at home, must not travel. It's illegal to travel. This is UK citizens to go abroad for leisure or holidays. So we're stuck at home, very much so. If, for reasons which I'm not clear, and it's a bit controversial, we still allow people from other countries in the world to come to the UK, if you arrive at Heathrow as a person arriving in full precautionary gear, if you arrive in the UK, and that the UK, United Kingdom, is England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. and the regulations are slightly different in different parts because there's regional government in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but neither Wales nor Northern Ireland have any international flights at the moment. But if you arrive at Heathrow Airport, you've got to be tested before you travel, and you've got to isolate or quarantine for 10 days when you get to this country. And if you come from one of the countries where the COVID virus is more or is worse than it is at the moment, the so-called red list countries, you have to stay in a government managed hotel by the airport, and you have to pay for that yourself. And it costs you, you have to stay there for 10 days at least, and it'll cost you £1,750, which I think is about $2,000. So you wouldn't, the incentive to come for a holiday is not very great if you've got to spend another $2,000 and 10 days in an airport hotel where you cannot leave your room and you have everything brought to the door. But there will be some people who, perhaps coming for a university course or some other reason, feel that they've got to do that. So the rules are very strict to try and isolate this virus. That's a map, the red countries, where we're not allowing anybody to come in at all. It lists the United States and Spain and Portugal. They're not forbidden at the moment. They're a slightly different shade of red on my map because they haven't been added yet, but they might be. But I think Brazil is the country where the virus is worse. So if you're coming from anywhere in South America and anywhere in the southern part of Africa, you would need to spend these 10 days, extra days at the airport. So that's a little bit where we are at the moment. And I now want to go back a bit. I'll go on to tourism and everything post COVID-19 in a little while. But I want to go back to the other aspect of the theme is Brexit, because as you can probably see on that map, the UK has formally left the European now, something that I much regret. But it was the result of it was never, I think most people didn't think it was going to happen, but getting on for 5 years ago, we had a referendum in the United Kingdom, of which, well, you can argue that that's, I don't know how the figures of the most recent American election turned out. It's probably a little, that's probably a little bit higher than your presidential turnout, but still nearly over 25% of people, a quarter of the people didn't take part in it. And it was a vote as to whether we should stay in the European Union. And the country split almost down the middle. And I think you know all about countries politically being split almost down the middle. And you can see there the balance of the vote leave and remain, but there was over 1 million votes in it. So it was close, but clear. What's more interesting in some ways is the map showing the yellow areas that voted to remain and the blue areas that voted to leave. At the top of the map is Scotland, which voted heavily to remain. Every part of Scotland voted to remain. And you can see that further down, most of England is blue, voting to leave, apart from what is the cities. Most of the cities voted to remain. So it is not a clear-cut result from that point of view. Very, very difficult to say it was overwhelming because different parts of the country voted differently, and it took its toll. It took its toll particularly on relationships between people, the different political parties, and it's cost us a lot of unity, and it's cost us 2 prime ministers. This was the morning after the referendum. That's David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, and his wife. And you can see the look of anguish on her face, because the morning after the referendum, Friday, the 24th of June, David Cameron, Prime Minister, came on the steps of number 10 Downing Street and resigned as Prime Minister because he'd called the referendum thinking he was going to win, and he lost. So immediately he resigned. I don't want to draw any parallels with American presidents moving on rapidly when they lost in elections, but Cameron went the day after, and he was replaced by Theresa May, who became Prime Minister shortly after him. And hers was a difficult period. She tried to deliver Brexit, which means she tried to negotiate with the European Union to get a deal. She tried to get something that the House of Commons, the British Parliament, would accept, but she didn't. And she called a general election, which she semi-lost, in that she lost her majority in Parliament, and she lost her support within her own political party, the Conservative Party. So the Conservative Party, being ruthless as it was, and I take no pride in this showing this picture, that was the Prime Minister, Theresa May, who very publicly resigned and quit as Prime Minister. And we didn't have a general election when she resigned. The new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was chosen by Conservative members of Parliament, because a bit like a president resigning in America, that the vice president takes over, you don't have a new election. We have elections every 4 or 5 years. Theresa May, they're obviously desperately distressed, resigned as Prime Minister, and the Conservative Party chose from amongst their number Boris Johnson, that's a flattering picture of him in some ways, because his hair is usually all over the place. And he fairly quickly got the deal with the rest of the European Union to cut us free. And there you can see him cutting free. Bojo, that's what sometimes he gets called. He won a general election in December 2019, having just delivered Brexit by getting a deal that's rapidly unraveling, because it was supposed to be a deal that was good for farmers, good for the fishing industry, good for business, but it hasn't turned out quite like that. And there are some people, me included, who think that this is a wound that we have self-inflicted on us. Now, many, many years ago, and it's about the first Prime Minister I can ever being referred to, British Prime Minister was called Harold Macmillan. He was very much a Prime Minister of the old school. And one time a journalist asked him what could go wrong with his government. And he famously said, the only thing that could go wrong would be events, dear boy, events, meaning things over which he had no control. So in politics, it's never all plain sailing. Things can go wrong, and you never know what is just around the corner. And when Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, was so pleased with himself for having delivered Brexit, taken Britain out of the European Union, which was his task, he thought he could then get on and become the sort of, I was going to say cowboy Prime Minister, but that's a little bit harsh, a showman Prime Minister that he wanted to be. He was a showman when he was Mayor of London, and I think he thought he could be that figurehead, charismatic Prime Minister. But events, dear boy, events took over, and creeping around the corner was, oops, sorry, I've gone on too quickly. Creeping around the corner was the coronavirus. And that was supposed to come in nice and slowly. So let's see what went wrong with that. It didn't, it's coming like that, which has hit us very badly. I think United States, you've just had 500,000 deaths. It's not proud of it, but the UK figure for our population is about 120,000, which per person is probably higher than the United States. And we have very strict, as you saw earlier on, rules. Wearing masks are compulsory to go into shops. There's very few shops are open. The only shops that open are food shops and pharmacies. Everything else is supposed to be closed. I haven't been in a supermarket since March of last year. We get our food delivered. You can't get your hair cut, and nearly everything else. All the restaurants, bars, cafes, everything is closed. And things were just about beginning to get a little better. And then there was this new strain, which hit Britain first. And so just as we thought things were getting easier, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, the UK hit by a new travel ban. All the other countries in Europe, nations ban travel from UK as new strain of virus takes hold. Europe shuts door on Britain. So whether this was connected, there were people who felt the other European countries jumped down on us much more quickly because we'd done the dirty on them by leaving the European Union. And this was their way of getting back to us, against us. But undoubtedly, we have the coronavirus very, very strongly here. We've got new variants, one called the Kent variant. We've got another one that came in allegedly from South Africa. And all of these are slightly different and less and more resistant to any vaccines. And we have now, I think, 20 million people have been vaccinated in this country. I've had my first dose of vaccines. They started with the oldest people. And I have a stepmother who's 100, and she had her vaccine, one of the first to have it, and then they gradually come down. And anybody who's got a particular illness or is particularly vulnerable has been vaccinated, and then they gradually have been reduced it. And I think they're getting down to people who are in their 50s now for the vaccines. And of course, all of this is having an impact. You can see in those pictures, the picture in the middle of people queuing at airports and railway stations, and very much travel has been brought to a complete standstill. The ski slopes of Europe, which have had very good snow this year, are closed to everybody apart from a few locals, because nobody else can get there. And if they do get there, there's no ski lift. So people are having to look at other ways of getting up and down the mountain, or get up the mountain before they ski down. And this shows a map. It tells you at the bottom the restaurants are closed in many, many countries. And the bright red countries have got lockdowns. Some countries have got curfews when you're not allowed out after 6, 7 or 8 in the evening. And it does vary from region to region, but you can see from Ireland in the west, across almost the borders of Russia in the east, and all the way down, nearly every country is in some form of lockdown due to the COVID-19 measures. Slightly different from every country, different in different parts of the countries, depending on the severity of the virus and how it's doing and how they are coping with trying to challenge it. And all of this, of course, has had a massive impact on travel and tourism. If you just look at this graph here, going back in, you can see that from 2011 to 2019, the number of visitors to the UK went up from 31 million in 2011 to nearly 41 million by 2019. 14 million visitors a year. Well, that may not sound very much to you in America, but when the population of the UK is only 65 million, so 40 million visitors over there, you can see the importance of it by 2019. But last year, it dropped to 9.7 million. And I'm not quite sure when this forecast was made, but it's difficult to see that that forecast now for 16.9 million will be reached for 2021, because we've got less travel so far this year than last year because of all the restrictions I explained right at the beginning. Nobody really is coming into this country at the moment. So we're nearly 2 months into this year, a sixth of the way through the year, and we're probably at about, I don't know how many thousands, but we're not at 1 million visitors. And although we've had some relaxation of the rules yesterday, there's absolutely no guarantee that foreign travel or foreign tourism will open up much as the year progresses. And would people want to be coming here at the moment? Quite apart from Brexit, and I'm not sure how much that difference that would have made, but when the horror stories of the number of people who are dying and the problems that we'd have been having, it's hardly surprising that tourism is down. And tourism is important to every country in Europe. This shows the percentage of people who are employed in the tourism industry. Now, you may think those figures are not very high, but they are substantial. And you look in Spain at the bottom, the yellow country, 9% of people employed in tourism. The other yellow country is Greece, down in the bottom right-hand corner, 10%. And that is a substantial number of people employed in the tourism industry. This includes people working in hotels, at airports, many of the restaurants, people whose livelihoods have just been not just decimated, but put on hold at the moment. For many of them, put on hold also means unemployment, no income, difficulty feeding their families, looking after themselves, and absolutely zero guarantee that it will be when it can recover. And if it does recover, whether they'll be able to get back. And if you imagine if you were running a restaurant and it's been closed for the best part of a year, you've had next to no income for a year. You may still have had to pay the rates or rents or property costs. You've still had to pay other aspects, and your staff will have been laid off. And it depends country by country what support you've been getting for. The British government has been generous in support for people who've been laid off, but it hasn't covered everybody to an extent at all. And that has had a financial impact on every country. And again, here we've got the figures, the spending, and you can see that in 2019, 28 billion pounds down to 9 billion pounds for this year. And my little calculation there is that they're expecting $12.5 billion to be spent this year in the UK. I don't think that figure is going to be reached anywhere near. You can see last year's figure of 5.7, showing a dramatic fall from 2019, when there was equivalent of $40 billion spent in the UK by tourists, overseas visitors to the UK, spending $40 billion equivalent, coming to through our airports, mainly to London, to other parts, to Scotland, all over the country. Last year that dropped to the figures on the screen, and the prediction is that this year it will be about a quarter of what it was in 2019, if that. And you can see the impact that's having, and there are plenty of hotels and resorts and other places that are just not anticipating opening again anytime soon. In other parts of Europe, as it is in this country, tourism is absolutely vital, critical to the economy. 2.6% of the GDP, the gross domestic product in America, but up to 11%, 4 times the figure for many of the countries in the European Union. Paris, there's the Eiffel Tower in Paris, tourism, the single largest industry. 12% of Parisians, all the people in Paris, 12% are working in tourism, hotels, restaurants, museums, boat trips up and down the River Seine, all of those which are closed at the moment, not functioning, and a huge, huge impact on the economy, not just of Paris, but of the European Union. From London to Paris, you can go, more people if they're going from London to Paris now would go by train, the Eurostar, the tunnel. Train takes about 2 hours. So it's probably quicker. The flight is only about 45 minutes from London to Paris, but you've got to get to the airport in advance, whereas when you get to the airport in Paris, you're outside the center of Paris, whereas the train goes city center to city center. So more and more people would use the train to go to Paris, but it's hardly being used at all at the moment. So this is really having a devastating impact on all of the countries in Europe. And that shows the impact of tourism in the different countries. Spain, 14%, and I think it's over to the right-hand side. Croatia, 25% economy reliant on tourism. Lots of people from this country, from Britain, but also Germany with historic links to Croatia, go there on holiday. None of those will be happening. So to try and address this, there have been a lot of plans being made, just as they, during the Second World War, made plans for what would happen at the end of the Second World War and how through the Marshall Plan they could rebuild Europe. They've been looking at similar ways that Europe can rebuild and Europe's tourism industry can be helped to recover post-COVID crisis. None of these countries will necessarily be worried about the Brexit impact, but it is now more difficult to get from the UK to the other countries in Europe, more time consuming. We previously would just get waved through with a British passport. Now our passports have to be checked. We have to go in a different queue. Not that I've done it yet. Our lorries taking food and other produce from the UK to Belgium or France or Ireland would previously just have been one European country to go into another. Now there are long queues as they're checked and fill in customs forms and reports. So Brexit has had an impact on that. And we're not sure yet what the impact, because it will be the first summer or the first year post-Brexit for tourism and transport across Europe. But the European Commission, which is the sort of civil service of the European Union, has developed and had on hold for a few months now a package to try and look at ways in which they can have a strategy to recover post-Brexit. They started this in 2020, and obviously we're now 2021, and they haven't been able to put it in. They will be restoring free movement, but sometimes there's borders controls being put in on mainland Europe, it's not just talking about borders between UK and the rest of Europe. It's re-establishing transport links that have been stopped, where trains are not running from one country to another, or travel is not permitted through different routes or different points, and making sure that it is as safe as possible. And looking and encouraging people to travel by offering them the opportunity to cancel, change. The papers are full of stories of people who've had flights cancelled and not got their money reimbursed, or people who've had trying to get from train travel from Britain to France or Germany or wherever it is, and then found that they couldn't change it, and the travel company has been reluctant to refund it. They've been reluctant to refund it because it costs them money, and they've spent out the money, and airlines have gone bust, train companies are finding it more difficult. And so the European Union is looking at trying to restore tourist activities and developing confidence by setting guidelines and rules for restaurants, hotels, and everything to try and make it as simple or as safe as possible and restore confidence in people. And one aspect would be to make the holidays greener and more environmentally friendly. And it's, I mentioned earlier on about a sort of Marshall Plan to help Europe recover. We're very strong on environmental protection within the European Union. We're moving rapidly towards battery and electric cars or hybrid cars, and trying to remove from the roads petrol, gas cars and diesel, and trying to change the whole focus to make it more environmentally friendly, and generally to encourage tourism. One of the things I'm most proud of during my time in the European Parliament was that I pushed through the Parliament legislation to make it easier, much easier for disabled passengers to travel around Europe. And I'm proud to say it's as a result of my piece of legislation that if you have a guide dog, you can now take a guide dog on well, if you could go on an aeroplane, a guide dog on aeroplanes and the Eurostar trains. Previously to that, you couldn't take a guide dog, but you can, if you are blind, take a guide dog with you. And older passengers or disabled passengers are entitled to help. This slide talks about the way to try and make tourism more sustainable, easier, generally linking the way people travel with the hotels that they're staying in, cutting out waste, and generally making tourism more sustainable, more viable, and safer in not just the 21st century, but a post-COVID situation. And all aspects of the industry are looking at that now. Advertising on transport is very aware of the ways that they've got to promote tourism, making people feel reassured that the industry is looking after them, that things will be safe, and that there is a proper economic response to this crisis. And here is a slide telling you, this is right near the end now, different countries, national measures, short-term schemes, direct budget support, a total 3.7 trillion euros, which is about $4 trillion worth of aid ready in the pipeline for when the European transport and tourism industry really gets going, gets back on its feet. But it's not a short-term exercise. There's a long road ahead, or a long railway line, railroad, seemingly going on forever with no end in sight, and no trains growing. So I conclude there, but I'll just throw in